All right, everyone. The corporate media in the Western world right now is trying to stir up trouble because otherwise things are just too calm. You see, up until a few years ago, it was generally understood that for the most part, things in the Western world were going pretty well. Like the economy had problems, it was sort of limping along, but for the most part, things were seemingly calm and stable. Crime was down at a near half-century lull. People had the internet to distract them and bread and circus a little bit at some points, and could talk about things, and it was generally agreed on that was a good thing. You'd talk to someone in a totally different country, talk to someone in Bhutan or Malaysia or whatever, and it was fun. Video games marching along, providing fun for people, and things were generally okay. Now, though, the corporate media realize that doesn't pay, like the tabloid alarmism does, as opposed to straight reporting. So they're trying to start like a civil war right now, especially in the United States, and here's how it happens. They harangue nonstop about the non-existent epidemic of far-right violence in the country. It doesn't exist. There's no actual such epidemic. Largely what they do is they take a few events, they extrapolate from them 1,000 others, sell that fear to people, and then say, oh, by the way, here's the groups adjacent to that hate. YouTubers, video games, music of certain types, anonymous posting on the internet. And so they take all these other groups, alt-tech, they take all these other groups of people and they sort of like group them with a handful of shooters or terrorists or whatever and make it out as though millions of other people are responsible for that problem. It's very similar to like how the very far right, like maybe the further than traditionalistic right, acted in the wake of 9/11 towards Islamic communities. There was no attempt to say, well, this group of Islamists here, they are specifically Islamo-fascist. They're following like the Wahhabi sect. They're like, the potentially violent. But those groups over there, here's the Shiites, the Alawites, other groups or nations that are run in a more secular sense, and that has nothing to do with it. There was no attempt to partition. There was just a grouping together for very stereotypical purposes. You see the same thing happening with just this idea of any ideology outside of the mainstream framework, which tends to be deliberately tilted to the left, and there's a reason for that. The reason is this. The natural reaction is that people on the left will start getting violent. When you convince people on the left, generally speaking, whether they're a CNN viewing center leftist or they're a right-wing watch RTing far leftist, when you convince them that there is actually an army, an upswelling on the internet and in real life, of Nazis, of fascists, of people who want to destroy Western civilization and turn it into a jackboot culture. If you convince people on the left that that's the case, those that are furthest to the left will begin taking up arms and conducting terroristic attacks. When that happens, what happens is that people in the creator community that you've lumped in with the far right, you've forced them to side with other people. I pointed this out after I was dogpiled in the wake of the Spencer debate years ago. I was debating an alt-righter. I was then called alt-right adjacent simply by being there, despite the fact that my views weren't in common. What happens is that then the other side gets paranoid and socially alienated. They start arming up. They start preparing for violence. They start looking for problems in society that they wouldn't have noticed before or aren't even present. They're just sort of, it's like, 5 degrees of Hitler game or something. They start looking around at their sometimes very calm community. It'd be like if I were on the far right now and getting paranoid, I'd be like looking around my neighborhood and say, well, my neighbor's over there, they got the Obama sticker. I don't know, maybe they're far left, maybe I need to get another gun because I could get jumped in the middle of the night. People get paranoid, they start distrusting their neighbors and even their families and shit, and it causes crime, it causes problems. It's the same social alienation and paranoia that was largely ameliorated by the internet because people who didn't have the money or the time to travel could meet people from other cultures. People who were in an echo chamber like a far left or a far right enclave could experience debate and ideas from other people, and it was no longer detached. It's not like some random right-winger watching MSNBC 30 years ago. It's not like some random person who's really conservative. They live in a red meat and potatoes, Alabama, small-town America district, encountering some hippie talk show, some college show. It's not like that. You were encountering another discrete individual, someone you could meet face-to-face on video, or you could talk with on a Skype call or something. And it would help modulate people's views. It would show them that the stereotypes, the echo chambers they had concocted in their mind weren't invariably the case. It also helped this way. Technology helped people get talked back from the ledge that were already radicalized. This has definitely happened. I have no doubt that in the wake of independent content creation in video form on YouTube alone being so popularized, people who otherwise, in the lack of the internet, would have gone out and done terrible things, were talked down from doing so because they were de-escalated and de-radicalized by the average person posting who isn't a radical. But that's not what the corporate media wants to sell. You see, they're in it for the money. They're not trying to cause a civil war out of malevolence and, oh, we're going to collapse Western civilization into an authoritarian dystopia. No, they have to live in that dystopian hellhole too. But they really want money. They, over the last 10 years, have been losing money because of an increase in internet content displacing them. They were later taters when it came to the internet. The private websites sometimes didn't go up until years after the internet existed and could host them and their content appropriately. Social media, forget about it. They're small time. You look at MTV News. I dwarf MTV News. It was funny because a couple of years ago, I was about even with them. And that's after, the last year or so of YouTube algorithmically demoting me. Not only to mention all the alt-tech sites that they constantly try to deplatform, or the anonymous posting they constantly demonize. No, the corporate media is trying to start a civil war, essentially. It's like Tim Pool's self-fulfilling prophecy. I do not believe that there will be a schismatic civil war in the U.S. or anywhere else. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that violence will increase so long as attacks on free speech are made, so long as people are driving wedges in the population. Oh, evil white males, evil toxic masculinity, terrible right-winger, terrible left-winger, all this bullshit. The corporations are the ones filling your head with all that fear and hate, dude. They're doing it to make a buck. They want to give an impetus for censoring independent content creators, get them out of the way, and then to keep clickbaiting, putting out propaganda because it sells. Fear sells. An article about the new train they built is never going to be viewed as much or talked about as much as the article about the train that derailed and killed 100 orphans. That's just a sad truth about the human race, that we tend to gather around and listen to these grotesque stories with wide gaping mouths and tut-tutting and shit like that. And it's just sort of the way that most people are. By the way, apparently there was a cat in the room. Hi? Yeah? You think I should end the video a little early? Okay, just a moment then. Basically what it boils down to is the corporate media wants money. They don't really care if they cause crime and violence and other paranoia towards one's fellow man, women, and children in the process. Because it makes them a buck. They're up in corporate boardrooms semi-sheltered from the situation on the ground for the average person. That's about all. Peace out.